Yanti Jimburdo the Nimi Jao, Monum Chimbor Gaviata, Bakratangon Santo, Shirmado, Tumba Teje Chanla Ki Shirumsar Kanjik Sai Karnam Kan, Semur Semur Jishipa, Raptor Chin and Roshi Chan, Sambin Chitin Zashi Pan Jitin Kundam Dundaran, the Takawa Yamshiba. Shibayan Tinaka Shimayan, Zonji Takan Television, Ganam Yan Debits, Shimati, Tendodenda, Sojima, Shipati, Division, the Karashid of Karachopra Sai Kartones, Sujan, the window, Jitin Tanatemaka, Ganam Yan Debits, Kanjim Dordendo. Zoni Yan Simsila on touché par télévision de Kawayan. Chuji Pombo Tomjana, Gatchavision Zamshida Chan, Lomchi Chivjan, Lomchi Chirkador son Baljan, Autosher, Namlancheta, it's a conjugate der GTE, Nyantur Namambrashi Laka. Yang Tinakawa Maya no, Kanjim Dodin Zambagam, Tapa Mubrashipa, Yang the Charishi and Donativision the Ka, Tonjoshia Mambo, or Namakangushima, Cherni the Jenum, Gombrishi, Monshi, Trigger, Karchin down, Rapcham Yala, Gopa, Ve, Ganam Yang and Degoto, Kanjim Domchon Dunzanba, Mamchoten, TV, Shandelema. Shiba Yen, Sanji Cheji Shiren, Jitin Kamnar Toms, Naishan the Chumosha, Tadon Tayan, Nanchato, Donam Dote Tamchile, Dote Tambam Chochi, Sham, Dote, and Donasin Zambat, and the Jerry Consanto, Rictiva Toshimi, Retio the Shidina, Tijana Lekansa, Yam, Doden Zambertur, Tejan Shabish Yarmo, Shind of Zonkan Donda, Ye, Kanji Zambaya, Jitem Gonam. Namkanda ka chimbur shibren ger jitem gonji tamchata tena shinda hunga bayan shinda huajang ni parte shangchipto nam ngonshi mir dorden dan sinzam ba chiba gerate jitem gonji tijite ndri sayar jis to moksom nyan de bana dorden dan rapton ba ladam marchi jitem na tena migda gerwaye kanji shimi tiji zem dorden dan se Yezheng Chabrashibam Kibai, Simpson Kunji Shak, Shago, Dinipjondan de Shanju Zenhui, Mali Badan Ladan, Tamayan the Chipin Jitin Woody, and the Urka Chip, Kapsardo, Germontar, Munshuan de Pitina, Karatsat me Patra, me Panget and Bichupa, Makarum Don Sarde. Stu Mamyon Alangarami Pretirto, Nuna Karata Malakara Jarton, Tomer, Narjarur, Lanami Payant of Shanship, Molum Tamning, Sim Dobra Majer, to Parut of Jimbatri, Yons of Dobra shared of some Britain, Jimbat me parap, the Jinterset, Nora, Matitan, Benjariatan. Dongdang Manshirdan, Shiradan, Salib Jamdan, Nurdan, Durnyambodan, Hugdan, Matu, Amarbodan, Jondan, Jonjir, Jondar, Jondan, Yernkuradan, Yerbupu, Jondan, Chomadan, Vupodan, Vumodan, Jambodan, Jamo, Alambo, Chedan, Artadan, Shantadan, Dakaliki, Varta, Yonsatante, Labadan, Kambadan, Godan, Yanladan, Yanlak Tamchatan, Jimbar Portier, Ne, Anamdayan, Kunda the Bisimmertie, so Kunda the Bisimmertie, so Yandi Zena Jitender, Umber, Gerate, Lojarton, Chogo, Di Zena, Chuji Pombo, Sher, Yarpo, Shi, Yankurji, Sher, Mayandi. Wo Wanker, I shows her Chujin Jonsora, Sombra, Gerton, each Chero don't end the kitchen, Merto, Alasi, Chujim Chorap to Jimbadan, to number Shabati, Changa, Changi, Xiao, Jichabra, so Teniti, Chanton, Jikan Alan, the kitchen, Meso, Gerbo Chambo, Tambicho, Pamakaro, Jishavam Dordi, Chutamba Yote, Chan the Kelim, Bachutela, Koji, Tula, Tobrasha, Gizerat. Nghe trong trong ti tsik te thu ne gam ge yerang gar te trong trong te de la te te ne ter ke chir me ba dang chan ji chip shi ba xia wo jer mo de ter ke ji trong trong te chan de ke lang ne za dang xiang dang che dang sa wa dang ru ge dam je la so ba len bi le shi de nge ge ru go chung yan chi shi so nyem bra na ba kan de te ta we shi nem sam mo mi char mo ma ti kan wa yang zong ma ti kan wa yang zong 곤장이 리랑가로 제라야 메도 sem가로 제라야 메도 텔레 시바 로동 상을 시소 되네 존든데기 디체 돈도 용수 담비 측습자 반도도 갑사도 가라야 가란데 바양도 지전데 ng은 주지자로 제라나 추시르는 제로 시 도시르 마연 춤축 돈도고 강식 줄마테 입장지샤 ng은 쇼즈데크 적브르시 디체 데이체나 장종게 바요 담바 주지샤람도 derma 되는 알아카테 전도 나 잔데 켈론 되네추 샤데 제르 츠데 투닝 안 랍다가 대남 찬지 샤벨 리지데 담비 주시르 잔나 셰바나 리당선랑 가르와 마락소 데시르 나이 셈진 셈진 슈르문지 더그 슈르문 도시르 마인데 레전 메피 슈크즈 남스 게 카라톤더 조브르 머큐 추지 샤르ම් 도르데 대니짐 도 겨보테나 테 트르스톤지 참 게롱동도 냠도 셈데 디체 디나 겨보르케로테 자직 임냠도 자나 테르 마타오 테치시제나 디디나 겨보르케로테는 가이노 게롱 디체 나 장종도 겨로테 자임냠도 마자테 디 마타오 테치시제나 게롱도 헤브진데 디체나 디디나 양 장종도 겨르데 게롱도 헤브진 양이 기우시니 야노 헤브진라 텐데니 바로도 셴바트 용서 조브르 시소 셴바침보동 가와 침보동 당님 침보동 스티오 침봄 산섬 지상니다 회주 정보 야치 우 고도 돈바강 임바당 암독 세르기 카도 mdok sergi kato tang top chidang manjikba vjedang dogongobo vjedang sanji chu manjeba vyatang zamchir gi top chembo dang chokji semjin jara de tamji ja lejin la tender zobur shizo gelong ta ket mo bra shawo kong de chibur shawo gelong ta lejin da mao kara tsame ba chang me ba nan ji tin gi kam le tin ki ji shawar na de jang sha ba jap chamba yang da bar zob san ye le yarbo ji shawar kirdo le yarbo ji shawar kirdo gelong da de jang sha ba le yarbo ten ti tsena varki kara nishi kirdo chu gebr tombra kirdo semjin kang long ko jimar ni tang na nyomong ba tamji le pa ne jap chamba ngozumde jibran gero semjin tamana janjim jodo sem gibr gero semjin kang ga long ko jima de da na la na me pa yang da bar zob janjim gibran gero jam jermer do bar zobr tobran gero gelong ta de da de jang saba li gerbo yonsum ning len de ba na tam bi chuki varkir ni shig ne so tier dongi rancherna gibr manje jan di skurdong chigden dibr tir de rumbo chernavden jim churten shinim churten te yang 파운드 호츠드 직접당 게르 호츠드 집지른 게로 대람마당 하 탐치 지부당 두부당 매도당 창화당 등등 시마 등바당 시마당 구당 등등 점선당 리와당 라소빈 슈브르 게로 스스자변 집도브른 게로 강동 주된 데라 코라시 바감 더파시바 대도냠 지금 쪽잡 좀 바니 또 무슨 시브른 게로 라라는 상집 도브른 게로 하당 뭐 삼기메 게바고노 메바노 라나메 바양도 버조바 샹치베 lep시르머 도브른 게로 데니 정든데기 게롱 달랍갑 자르와 게롱도 마오 티나 리기브 모칸라 담비 추파마카르 랭다 냠바당 투니 솜니 마자와다 남버터비 셈기 무바테덕 만로섬 jirgop jabarin gerde semjan yarwadan tanrodan chimji jigdendir ker mengero jogji sanji sanji ji jan tenayang ceram dorde tubran gero ladamin jigden kenayang dine oni jabar janda tubran gero sanji ji jan de dogder ker gero de jangshabi kyannger rumbo chernavdan paminand zide kevaran gero
Let's begin teaching the Lotus Sutra. Please everyone generate the supreme and extraordinary bodhicitta. Today we'll continue teaching the chapter on the appearance of a jeweled stupa. We've already covered a portion of this chapter in the earlier lesson. Today we will continue with the last part of this chapter. The merit of this chapter on the appearance of a jeweled stupa is very great. In the records in praise of the lotus, there's also a simple story. There was a Dharma master named Faji. He ordained as a monk from a very young age. He especially loved reading the Lotus Sutra. In secluded places he often meditated and practiced virtuous dharma. Later, once when he went to another monastery in a quiet place, at this monastery, at night he was reading the Lotus Sutra. When he read to this chapter on the appearance of a jeweled stupa, there was auspicious thunder and lightning flashing in the sky, as if a violent rainstorm were coming. The people in this monastery saw that above the place where this Dharma master was staying, in the space, there was an extraordinarily clear jeweled stupa in the sky. Everyone generated tremendous faith. Stories like this, when we look at some historical accounts now, indeed, these great masters and ordinary practitioners from the past all practiced through the Lotus Sutra. Including in this chapter, it seems each chapter of the Lotus Sutra has different miraculous responses. Regarding this chapter on the appearance of a jeweled stupa, we've also discussed many miraculous responses earlier. That's one. And there's another. We often speak of the national preceptor Qingliang. He lived through 9 dynasties and served as national preceptor to 7 emperors. National preceptor Qingliang was truly remarkable. He made vows. I've seen his aspirational vows. He had 10 great vows. Among his 10 great vows, there was one great aspiration: to continually recite the Lotus Sutra, and also to continually read Mahayana scriptures, and also to continually teach the Avatamsaka Sutra. So among his vows, one was that throughout his life he would constantly recite the Lotus Sutra. This was one of his 10 great vows. He also often read and recited Mahayana Buddhist teachings. This was also one of his aspirational vows. And another was that he constantly taught the Avatamsaka Sutra. As for teaching the Avatamsaka Sutra, historically he had already taught it over 50 times. So sometimes when we see the spirit of these great masters, it's truly quite remarkable. Now there are very few who teach the Avatamsaka Sutra. In the past, Venerable Master Jing Kong taught it. It seems Venerable Menkan, when he was around 90 years old, it seems he also taught it at that time. He should have finished teaching it. But for some of our current elder monks, when they teach it, it takes approximately 5 or 6 years. It requires this amount of time to finish teaching it. The Avatamsaka Sutra is particularly vast. The Lotus Sutra is actually much shorter than the Avatamsaka Sutra. Therefore, sometimes we should think about this. These great masters of the past were also practitioners, and we are practitioners of this generation. It's just that our eras are different, but our need for liberation and their need for liberation are no different. Why can't we be diligent? They often never lay down at night to sleep. They had many principles of practice, and these practice principles never declined throughout their entire lives. The ancients had very firm resolve. Unlike us now, when we're happy, we make many, many vows. When we're sad, we abandon everything. We might even slander the Mahayana Buddha Dharma with various excuses, even slandering our teachers, Dharma friends, and so forth. Now, our sentient beings in this degenerate age have extraordinarily unstable mental states. Just like ripples on water, one ripple appears for a moment, then another ripple emerges. So sometimes when we compare ourselves to the learning spirit of the ancients, we truly feel very ashamed. In any case, today let's continue with the teaching. Yesterday we discussed how after the Buddha's parinirvana, in an evil age, to read the Lotus Sutra even temporarily is extraordinarily difficult. Today let's continue. Suppose at the end of Kalpa fire, when this Kalpa is finally destroyed, there's what's called the end of Kalpa fire. When the end of Kalpa fire is burning, if someone were carrying a pile of grass and entering into the fire, not to mention the end of Kalpa fire, even now when some large forests burn. It seems a while ago in a place in the northeast, 3,000 people went to fight the fire but still couldn't extinguish it. It seems the authorities allocated 40 million or something to save the fire and used helicopters to extinguish the fire. but it burned for a very long time. Such large forest fires aren't particularly hot. The Vinaya scriptures often speak of the heat of the end of Kalpa fire. So during the end of Kalpa fire, if someone were carrying a very large pile of grass and entering into it, it would be impossible to survive, impossible to escape. However, through miraculous powers or through certain illusions, one wouldn't be burned by the fire. This is also possible. So this isn't particularly difficult. What's most difficult? The Buddha said, after my parinirvana, if someone can uphold the great Mahayana Lotus Sutra, upholding it themselves and expounding it even to just one person, not to mention many people, expounding it to one person would be extraordinarily difficult. We also hope many people will make aspirations that in the future, teaching the Dharma to one person isn't very difficult. I've discussed this before. I once transmitted the great commentary on the Abhidharmakosha to one person, so if there's truly a transmission among you all, I mainly think that here in the Han regions, there's now a very unfortunate habit. The habit of seeking the Dharma is lacking. This is extraordinarily regrettable. It seems like people don't pay attention to this matter. I want to seek the Dharma. Can you please teach me once? Please teach me this sutra once. Please teach me that sutra once. In general, many people don't have such a thirst for learning. They only seek to have the performing a ritual or receiving a blessing for themselves or received a blessed item. Apart from this, there's no traditional approach to hearing, contemplating, and practicing. This is very regrettable. That is to say, teaching even one person. This should have existed in the past. If we look at the Tang and Song dynasties, including the Ming and Yuan dynasties, at that time, there should have been much Dharma teaching in many monasteries. You see, these great Dharma masters of the past often taught many times. They taught a single sutra many times. This also happened. So we need to contemplate this again. If someone upholds the 84,000 teachings of the Dharma treasury and expounds the 12 divisions of scriptures to others, and moreover causes many people to receive the teachings and attain the 6 miraculous powers, the 6 powers like those who have attained the Śrāvaka fruit, actually, this is not difficult to attain such state. For us to speak of this, it is truly difficult. The 84,000 teachings and the 3 baskets and 12 divisions, to expound them all to others, and moreover cause the listeners to attain the 5 eyes and 6 powers, this isn't so easy. But the Buddha said this isn't particularly difficult. What's most difficult? The Buddha said, after my parinirvana, if someone hears this sutra and repeatedly inquires into its profound meaning, this is most difficult. The Tibetan says, after my parinirvana, if one hears this sutra and generates conviction in the contents of this sutra, generates faith, this is most difficult. So whether generating conviction or hearing the contents of this sutra, exploring it or generating faith in it, perhaps through inquiry, through our usual discussions and study guidance, in this way, this is extraordinarily difficult. Many of us indeed, after listening, everyone discusses and deliberates together. This is very good. If there are things you don't understand, ask other wise Dharma friends. Through such mutual inquiry and dialogue, entering into its profound meaning, this is extraordinarily difficult. Then it continues, saying that if someone teaches the Dharma and causes thousands of myriads of kotis, countless, limitless beings as numerous as the sands of the Ganges to attain the fruit of arhatship, and moreover be endowed with the 6 miraculous powers, although such great meaning and great benefit should be said to be extraordinarily difficult, for some people this is not very difficult, causing countless thousands of myriads as numerous as the sands of the Ganges to attain arhatship and gain miraculous powers, such a tremendously beneficial deed, actually this is not very difficult. What's most difficult? The Buddha said that after my parinirvana, if one can truly uphold this, if we truly wish to uphold it, make offerings, carry it with us, revere it, or if we often hand copy this sutra, actually in the broad sense what's called upholding means upholding with a respectful mind, including recitation. Actually upholding contains many aspects. After my parinirvana, if one can uphold this sutra, the Lotus Sutra, then this is most difficult. So I think many of us indeed so fortunate because we've encountered this sutra before we passed away. I think everyone should also have such great faith to the Lotus Sutra. If you don't have affinity with Mahayana Buddhism, you might not feel much. If you have some understanding of the merit of Mahayana Buddhism and these teachings, you should have a somewhat different feeling, a faith, I suppose. The Buddha continues, saying, "For the sake of these beings, I have attained the path of Buddhahood. Throughout countless inconceivable lands, from the time I generated bodhicitta until today's attainment of Buddhahood, I have already extensively expounded many scriptures. The Tibetan says that in the future I will also expound many scriptures. In the past, I expounded many sutras. In the future, I will also expound extraordinarily many scriptures, including what we've discussed after the Buddha's enlightenment, sutras like the Agama Sutras, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Vinaya Sutras, the Prajnaparamita Sutras, as well as the Nirvana Sutra. There are so many in the Tripitaka. And also like the Kalachakra Tantra and so forth, the treatises the Buddha expounded regarding Tantra. Among all these vast thousands of sutras and myriad treatises like smoke and clouds, among all these different scriptures, this Lotus Sutra should be foremost. The Buddha said this himself. Among the sutras I have extensively expounded, among all the sutras I've expounded in the past, future, and present, it is foremost. If you don't believe in Buddhism, then it doesn't matter. But if you truly believe in the Vajra words of our teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, we must take this Lotus Sutra seriously. Because the Buddha personally praised it in this way, this is truly extraordinarily rare. If someone can uphold this Lotus Sutra, then this shows that this person is personally upholding the Buddha's body. His Dharma body relics are like this. So when we carry this Dharma text, actually we're truly carrying the Buddha's body with us. Therefore, in the future, this isn't just talk. Just speaking beautiful words. This is not the behavior of a practitioner. Through this time studying the Lotus Sutra, many people should have different feelings. In the future, I hope this enthusiasm and these aspirational vows won't be lost. The Buddha told everyone, all the virtuous men and women, after my parinirvana, whoever can uphold the Lotus Sutra or recite the Lotus Sutra, today in the presence of the Buddha, you should make vows yourselves, register yourselves, declare yourselves. From earlier until now, recently at Larongar as well, there have been many Dharma teachers. I haven't deliberately mobilized everyone, but many Dharma teachers have voluntarily requested to copy sutras. I saw that day at the stairway entrance so many Dharma friends panting while carrying very large bundles. I said, "What's this?" "It's the Lotus Sutra." "It's the Lotus Sutra. It's too heavy." So many of our Dharma friends have begun copying sutras. Various places are doing this. Actually, this is very good. Yesterday at the Dharma teachers meeting, I also told them, we don't need to especially insist that you must do this or that. Otherwise, some people might feel pressured, I don't know. But after all, this time so many of us are listening together, teaching together, studying together. After studying, if we also have some action in actual practice, this is also very good. You too, throughout your remaining lives, forming virtuous connections. You see, here it also says, whether upholding, reciting these today in the presence of the Buddha, when the Buddha was alive, it was also like this. So when the Buddha is not in the world after the Buddha's parinirvana, we can also declare our vows ourselves. Throughout your remaining lives, everyone should also be able to, whether reciting, upholding, or copying, reading and reciting for the ancients, these were generally separated. We can reciting from memory, reading aloud, expounding to others, even carrying it on our body. If it's truly inconvenient, placing it in a shrine room, all of these are acceptable. These are all things we should aspire to. This can also be considered a karmic connection. Throughout your remaining lives, whoever is willing, please raise your hands. Reciting, writing, and upholding are all included. Any one of these should be acceptable. Okay. All of you who made vows yourselves, not because of me, if the Lotus Sutra teachings are completed in the future, I'll also give a small reward. What does this mean? You applauding like this, you yourselves won't get the reward. No. What's being taught here is making vows in front of the Buddha. This sutra is difficult to recite and difficult to uphold. If one can uphold it even temporarily, the Buddha said, I am also extraordinarily, extraordinarily joyful. If the Buddha is joyful, When we uphold, recite, or expound the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha is extraordinarily joyful. Not only is Shakyamuni Buddha joyful, but all the Buddhas of the future, past and present, are likewise joyful. And such people, those who often love reading the Lotus Sutra, indeed in the past in the Han regions, I think in the Tibetan region, although there's great faith in this Lotus Sutra, it wasn't like in the Han regions. Looking at history, there wasn't the same special emphasis on recitation as in the Han regions. Such customs didn't exist. In the past, generally in Tibetan areas, each household would read when going through the Kangyur. They did read it. Individual families that recited the Lotus Sutra also existed, but it wasn't like in the Han regions. In the Han regions, there were extraordinarily many during a certain period. Didn't we see some historical accounts before? Such people who upheld the Lotus Sutra, not only our teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, but all Buddhas are extraordinarily joyful. Moreover, they also constantly, in their respective different worlds, use words of praise to extol them. This person teaches the Lotus Sutra. This person reads the Lotus Sutra. This person copies the Lotus Sutra. This person is doing such and such. All the Buddhas also praise them. How do they praise? People who read the Lotus Sutra are truly great bodhisattvas. They are extraordinarily courageous, extraordinarily diligent people. Moreover, they can be called holders of the precepts, or they are practitioners of dutta practices. Or we could say that through cultivating the Lotus Sutra, within a very short time they will swiftly attain supreme Buddhahood. Within a very short time, they will attain the supreme fruit of Buddhahood. So the Buddha offers praise in different scriptures. Here it teaches that in a future age, if one recites in a future age, if someone recites the Lotus Sutra, actually this person is a true child of the Buddha. They dwell in the realm of pure goodness. They dwell in what is truly pure or has the meaning of purity, the land of goodness and wonder, attaining Buddhahood or attaining the fruit of noble ones. Also, in the records of the Lotus transmission, it says there was a Shramana who often read the Lotus Sutra in the mountains. When reading the Lotus Sutra, there were very, very many monkeys in those mountains. It seems I mentioned this before. There were extraordinarily many monkeys. Over 100 monkeys would sometimes listen. At Larunga now, as you come up, there's that place called, below Ara Sacred Mountain. There's specifically a place where they make offerings to monkeys. It's no different from Mount Amy. There are many monkeys waiting along the road, so when the time comes, we can also recite the Lotus Sutra to them. That Shramana just now recited the Lotus Sutra to them. Later, there was one rather old monkey that had departed from this world. After departing, it seems the next day, or perhaps in the middle of the night, in the sky there came an extraordinarily wondrous voice of a celestial being saying, "Because I received the merit of the Lotus Sutra, I have now been reborn in the celestial realm. Now, to repay your kindness, I'm offering you a celestial luminous pearl. I've placed it at your cave entrance," or something like that. Later, this person indeed found a kind of jewel. When viewed from afar at night, it had an extraordinarily bright light, like a lamp. For the ancients, relying on such faith, there were extraordinarily many such miraculous responses. So when reciting, it's not only for us humans. For the sentient beings around us, we can liberate them through the Lotus Sutra. So some of us, for example, if your relatives and friends who have passed away, during the 49 days, if you constantly think of them, constantly recite their names, you should also recite it once for them. For instance, if your relatives have passed away, actually here at Larungar, when some elderly people pass away, it's still very auspicious. For example, starting in the morning after reciting tens of thousands of Buddha's names after that they passed away, the way many people depart is not like us, ordinary people, crying and making a fuss, passed away from this human world in great suffering. Such situation will make the family members in a very uneasy feelings in their hearts. Should not be like this when they passed away. Sometimes through practice, life truly receives an inconceivably wonderful purification. After they've departed, we also read the Lotus Sutra for these intermediate state beings, for these sentient beings. Reading the Lotus Sutra is also very important. We can recite the Lotus Sutra near the ears of those who are living beings, including animals, if you can't read the whole sutra and just reading partial contents. And for example, just recite one chapter or teaching one chapter of the Lotus Sutra. This way has extraordinarily great merit. The Buddha said, after my parinirvana, if one can understand its meaning, that is, the meaning of the Lotus Sutra, then this person can be called the eye of the world for all human and celestial beings. What is the eye of the world? Not only do we understand the Lotus Sutra, but we also expound it to others, or if we ourselves comprehend its meaning, this is the clear vision of the world. The wisdom eye of the world is already present. We often use this term, eye of the world. In the past, some translators and scholars were also often called eye of the world. Like Vairocana of old, the precious translator in the Tibetan region, we're also extraordinarily grateful to them. Because without them, it seems many such especially excellent treatises and scriptures from India would have had no way to radiate light in the dark world of the Tibetan region. So we often call Vairocana, the precious translator, the eye of the world. So if one can thoroughly understand the meaning of the Lotus Sutra, this is called the eye of the world. If one doesn't understand the principles of the Dharma, actually this can also be called being blind. When I was writing Ocean of Wisdom, a woman from Canada said, did you quote a statement from Sakya Pandita, and it is saying that apart from studying Buddhism, many don't have very high wisdom. She didn't accept this way of speaking. On one hand, I also feel this way of speaking is somewhat correct, but on the other hand, indeed, the true nature of all phenomena, if one hasn't heard, hasn't studied, hasn't understood, in a certain sense, one can also be called blind. The Sutra on the recollection of the true Dharma says, far from seeing and hearing the Dharma, such a one is truly blind. If we are far from hearing and directly perceiving the Dharma of truth, then this person can be called blind in the world. Although they have physical eyes, perhaps the physical eyes can see some things, the mind cannot see the true nature of things. However, from the ultimate perspective, in the third chapter at the end of Kandrakarti's clear words commentary on the Mula Madhya Makakarika, from the ultimate perspective, the eye-seeing phenomena is also not established. One can say the eye cannot see dharmas, cannot directly perceive any forms. There are also such scriptural citations. So from the ultimate perspective, when we speak of eye of the world, it's also not established. The blind are also not established. But from the conventional perspective, calling people who don't know the truth blind is also acceptable in this frightening world. In a world of terror or possessing fear and trepidation, in the world of the 5 degenerations, if someone for even a brief moment expounds the Lotus Sutra, we cannot speak of how many class sessions or day by day. Including now, we teach for 1 hour each day. 1 hour wouldn't be called a brief moment. 1 hour is rather long, but without such a long time, in a brief period, if one expounds the Lotus Sutra, then this person, all human and celestial beings, can make offerings to them. Even the dust their feet have trodden will be venerated. So generally speaking, whether it's the Mahayana Buddha Dharma or the Hinayana Buddha Dharma, although a Dharma teacher may not be a noble one, making offerings to them brings inconceivable fruition. In the Abhidharma Nyayanusara Shastra, it says, to parents, the ill Dharma teachers, and the final life Bodhisattva, even if they haven't attained noble realization, the fruits of generosity are also immeasurable. Although they are not noble ones, making offerings and being generous to them brings boundless, limitless merit. We discussed this before when teaching the Abhidharma Kosha, didn't we? This is language from the Abhidharma Kosha, right? Yes. Which chapter? The 4th chapter. Are you sure? Really? Okay. So although parents are not noble ones, making offerings to them also brings great merit. The ill are not noble ones. What I just quoted was Xuanzang's translation of the Abhidharmanyayanusara Shastra. What we translated before might be slightly different in wording, but it's actually the same. Although parents are not noble ones, the ill are not noble ones. Dharma teachers are also not noble ones. Some people say, I really can't generate faith in my Dharma teacher. they're probably not a great realized being. I feel their afflictions are quite heavy, but if the Dharma teacher's afflictions are quite heavy, the Dharma they teach should be authentic Dharma. So, if you have faith in them, suppose they haven't attained the realization of a noble one, but making offerings to them also brings immeasurable merit. Otherwise, if you constantly examine, some people tell me, comparatively speaking, my afflictions are a bit less. Our Dharma teacher sometimes is in great suffering. You don't know Kenpo. Our Dharma teacher sometimes has a bit of a temper, but they keep enduring. I know they're suffering inside, but they keep enduring. Some people don't examine what should be examined and where they shouldn't examine. They don't observe the positive side, but constantly. Some people themselves are like, you know how some microscopes are characterized by looking at small things? Some telescopes can pull distant things closer. Some people's eyes can only see faults. Some people see qualities. For example, a person has both qualities and faults, but some people's mind's eye can only observe faults, not qualities of others. So some Buddhists truly, they themselves also suffer greatly every time they absorb many, many negative things, even a very, very small thing, but to them it's an extraordinarily big matter. Then as for positive energy, even very large matters, they don't feel anything. For instance, what happiness they've gained, they don't feel much about this. Then if there's even a little bit of suffering, they continuously magnify it, until finally they themselves sometimes can't bear it and continue like this. Perhaps people's afflictions, past life conditions, there are many, many differences. In any case, whether your Dharma teacher's afflictions are heavy or not, don't constantly examine them. Sometimes observe their qualities. Our Dharma teacher's afflictions are quite heavy. I know they're suffering. Dharma teachers aren't necessarily all realized beings or noble ones. So Shakyamuni Buddha in the scriptures also didn't say that all Dharma teachers must have attained arhatship or above. The characteristics of gurus also don't say this. So it's normal for Dharma teachers to have some afflictions, understood. Next, we'll teach the chapter on Devadatta. In the Tibetan, there's no division in the middle. There are 2 layers of content. Below, we'll teach this chapter on Devadatta. The chapter on Devadatta, actually the merit of this is also very great. There's a story told like this. In the past, there was a wealthy man who had 2 wives. His first wife especially loved reading the chapter on Devadatta from the Lotus Sutra. She especially enjoyed practicing it. The second wife was rather lazy and didn't like reading books. She was jealous of the first wife. Once when the first wife wasn't home, she seized this opportunity and trampled the chapter on Devadatta from the Lotus Sutra with her feet and destroying it. Very disrespectfully like this. This is what the second wife did. She was very displeased, generating jealousy. Later, it seems within 3 days she died. After dying, the family felt her behavior was too excessive, so they didn't quickly dispose of the corpse. Finally, she went before Yama, the Lord of Death. Yama discovered that she had also done some bad deeds, but he also discovered that most importantly, under her feet there was golden light, because she had trampled on Buddhist scriptures before. Yama praised her, saying, when you were in the human realm, you still had contact with Buddhist scriptures. You're very fortunate. Then he allowed her to return. After returning, she felt extraordinarily regretful. She deeply regretted and repented her own behavior. She also felt extraordinarily ashamed of her previous jealousy. From then on, she began reading scriptures with a respectful mind. Then she ordained as a nun. In the end, I don't know how, whether she attained realization or what. The later part isn't written. From this we can see that even if we don't have virtuous mind, sometimes with neutral mind or even harmful mind toward the person, she probably had jealousy at that time. But only toward the Lotus Sutra. She didn't have that kind of jealousy. But generally some women's jealousy might be like this. Watching many TV shows and movies, it's also like this, especially in much of Chinese history. For instance, if one person has several wives, then among them some jealousy in the palace can happen like this. At that time, she generated jealousy toward the person, but when she trampled the Lotus Sutra with her feet, later merit arose. We also discussed in the earlier skillful means chapter, if someone with a distracted mind enters a stupa or temple and utters once Namo Buddha, they have all accomplished the Buddha path. Actually, regarding this distracted mind, perhaps when explaining it comparatively. And for example, having an angry mind, having such a mind, if one forms a virtuous connection with this dharma, there's also great merit. There are also children who, for play games, they use tree branches or wooden blocks to make something like Buddha images, or if they copy the Lotus Sutra, they can also enter the Buddha path. There's this. So these merits are indeed sometimes difficult to imagine, inconceivable. Therefore, the chapter on Devadatta below, it looks like the chapter on Devadatta a bit frightening. At the very beginning, I thought, what does this chapter on Devadatta actually mean? Would it be good for me to study it? But after studying it, there are still many meanings we must understand. How does this chapter on Devadatta teach below? At this time, the Buddha told many bodhisattvas, celestial beings, and the fourfold assembly, in past immeasurable kalpas, I sought the Lotus Sutra without weariness, without growing tired, because in past immeasurable kalpas, he often, in many kalpas, served as a king. Once when he was a king, he made this vow to seek supreme Bodhi, and moreover in his mind thought never to turn back. The reason, wanting to perfect the 6 paramitas and also practicing generosity without any stingy mind. Moreover, he gave elephants, fine horses, and so forth, using the 7 wheel-turning treasures, and also the nation's governance, cities, including his wife, children, servants, and so on, his own head, eyes, and marrow, and also his body's flesh and blood, hands and feet. All of these he gave up without hesitation. That is to say, he spared no cost for the sake of seeking the Dharma. The Maharatnakutta Sutra says, for the sake of seeking the Dharma, not sparing body and life, cultivating all virtuous roots, the mind never satisfied. For the sake of seeking the Dharma, not sparing one's own body and life. For the sake of practicing virtuous roots day and night for thousands of myriads of kalpas, never having a satisfied mind, never growing weary. This is the Buddha's most noble, most magnificent, most remarkable spirit. We ordinary beings now, whether seeking the Dharma or doing many things, can manage for 2 or 3 days. After that, with a mentality of loving the new and discarding the old, we cannot continue long term. The Buddha often served as a king and moreover generated the mind of Supreme Bodhi, and furthermore to perfect the 6 paramitas he made so much generosity, external material things, including internal things like his own body, flesh and blood, and so forth. All of these he never cared about, never regarded. At that time, people's lifespans were extraordinarily long. They should have been immeasurable years. For the sake of the Buddha Dharma, he abandoned them. Once this king, to obtain the Buddha Dharma, renounced his country's royal position. He entrusted the entire governance to his own crown prince. The Tibetan says he performed a ceremony, an abhiseka. When the crown prince ascended the throne, there must be an abhiseka. He beat the drum and then proclaimed to all the citizens that he was ceding his royal position to his crown prince. He proclaimed to all the citizens, he said, "From now on, I want to seek the Dharma in all directions. Among all the people of our entire nation, whoever can expound the Mahayana Buddha Dharma to me, if this person expounds the Mahayana Buddha Dharma to me as a king, I can also follow them, serving as an ox, serving as a horse, serving as their attendant, doing work." Sometimes for us, whether Dharma teachers or some of us, perhaps in the past, our worldly diplomas, worldly talents, being comparatively higher in appearance value, or various people, sometimes feel, I'm very remarkable. Why should I be like this? Inside the mind, there's an extraordinarily great pride. In this way, the body naturally becomes stiff. We're unwilling to prostrate, unwilling to respectfully listen to the Dharma, especially regarding worldly learning. Sometimes I see that Western people are somewhat different from Asian people. Asian people, Japan is slightly more reserved, but other places are still fairly good. I haven't been to Asia much, but it's acceptable. Western people are a bit arrogant. When listening to the Dharma, it seems they don't have much reverence. Of course, after they have faith, they're still very earnest. For the sake of the Buddha Dharma, indeed, they also renounce, abandon everything. That is to say, being someone's servant for life is also acceptable. So at this time, the king just said, for the sake of obtaining the Buddha Dharma, I can completely lay down all my status. At this time, there was a RSI. In this country, there was a RSI who addressed the king saying, I have the Mahayana Buddha Dharma. The name of this Mahayana Buddha Dharma is called the Lotus Sutra. If you don't go against my wishes, I can expound it to you. Now, in this era, if a king seeks the Dharma, many gurus would say, I'll transmit it to you, I have the transmission. Even without the transmission, they might still say they have, because becoming the king's national preceptor, many people are like this. But at that time, ARSI said, I have it. Looking at this here, naturally, there's also a transmission, indirectly like that. In our Tripitaka, I have this Dharma. If I have this Dharma, it shows he has this transmission. Otherwise, if you just have a Dharma text, you probably wouldn't say, I have this Dharma, because he has connected with the transmission above. Sometimes some of us might be a bit confused about transmission. In that case, these Dharma seekers of ancient times, when they said, I have this Dharma, they would certainly mention, I received this Dharma from above. And having received this Dharma, if it's been transmitted in an unbroken line, this is a kind of lineage. This is very important. Now, some people wonder, what exactly is a transmission? A lineage actually exists in every scripture. For example, when the Buddha was in a former life, he often said, I have this Dharma. Does I have this Dharma refer to a Dharma text? Certainly not a Dharma text. Many people have Dharma text. Now at distribution centers everywhere, if you buy them, I have this Dharma. If I want to teach for the king wouldn't necessarily listen. What does you have this Dharma mean? If you're selling this Dharma text as a king, could I not afford to buy a copy of the Lotus Sutra? That's impossible. So I have this Dharma shows he has this transmission. Therefore, when you encounter some kings in the future, you should also say, I have this Dharma. If you don't have the transmission and only obtained a Dharma text, this king won't necessarily be very happy. Last year in Africa, there were quite a few small countries. Some kings also seemed rather casual. When I went last year, there was a king who requested the Dharma. Then I said, for the sake of auspicious connection, I can teach him a little when the time comes. But certainly there won't be time to teach the Lotus Sutra. When the time comes, I'll recite Om Mani Padme Hum to him. So in the future, if there are some small country kings, big country kings won't necessarily listen to your teachings. But if there are some small country kings, when you feel it's necessary, you can also teach them the Mahayana. You see, the RSI here also said, I have the Mahayana Dharma. The name of this Mahayana Dharma is called the Lotus Sutra. I can expound the Lotus Sutra to you. When the king heard the RSI's words, he was extraordinarily joyful and exuberant. Then, immediately in the presence of the RSI, he made offerings to him of all his material possessions, and moreover he gathered fruits, drew water. Drawing water means fetching water. Some commentaries say carrying water. Carrying isn't necessarily it. Drawing means drawing water from a well, and also gathering firewood, arranging food for him and even his own body. The Tibetan says he also served as a gatekeeper. The RSI must have been rather remarkable. He also made his body into a bed and a mount. Body and mind had no weary thoughts. So in the process of relying on spiritual teachers, all services truly need to be without weary thoughts. Moreover, such acts of service, actually, he went through 1,000 years, because at that time people's lifespans were also long. For the sake of this Dharma, he diligently served as his attendant, without any lack, without any shortage, and without any other conditions, only for obtaining the Dharma for tens of thousands of years, working very hard for this Dharma. The Sutra of the collection of all Dharmas says, the wise associate with the wise, they should leave behind the unwise. Through the virtue of wisdom to cultivate the body, such a person is extraordinarily rare. As for the wise, they rely upon the wise, distancing themselves from the unwise. Through this way they can cultivate body and character. One can also say that such people, whether in human history or in this world, are extraordinarily scarce, extraordinarily rare. Sometimes we humans need to rely on spiritual teachers, rely on people of wisdom. If you rely on people of wisdom, you can obtain the merit of wisdom. Everyone just now should understand what kind kind of spirit it takes to seek the Dharma. At that time, Shakyamuni Buddha restated this meaning. In past many kalpas, for the sake of seeking the Buddha Dharma, although serving as a king, at that time I had no greed for the 5 desires. No greed for the desirable objects of form, sound, smell, taste, and touch. At that time I beat the drum and informed all people of the 10 directions. Who has the Mahayana Buddha Dharma? If there is Mahayana Buddha Dharma, explain it to me. Though I am a king, I will also become their servant. If they explain it to me, my body will become a servant. My meaning is, when we seek the Dharma in the future, everyone should let go of their former pride, their former status, or the notion that they themselves are very remarkable. Completely unload all of this. We should be a person who is very sincere and respectful. There are extraordinarily many such people now, including among these people listening to teachings now. There are some very remarkable professors, scientists, people who've contributed tremendously to human society. When listening to teachings, they're extraordinarily earnest. I've also seen people in Beijing, Shanghai, and also abroad. Indeed, whether in their schools or within the scope of their work, their worldly wisdom is extraordinarily superior, but they themselves also know that some transcendent principles might still require systematic study. If there's no systematic study, relying solely on worldly learning won't bring liberation. So regarding all their worldly status, wealth, they don't particularly generate pride because of it. Rather, they lay everything down, respectfully and joyfully beginning to receive the Mahayana Buddha Dharma. I also hope many of us should also have this. Sometimes when I go out, some professors, their worldly learning is extraordinarily high. I myself also feel a bit ashamed, but for the sake of respecting the Buddha Dharma, our mutual dialogue is also quite reasonable. Sometimes I also see these people have so many students. These people regarding schools, regarding the world. I often go to schools. When going to schools, often there are many professors who've already studied the Dharma for over 10 years. Moreover, never interrupting, studying extraordinarily earnestly, especially now among these people listening to teachings, university students and teachers occupy a relatively large proportion. Perhaps the reason is that we often teach things that are relatively systematic, whether from the worldly perspective or from many aspects. We very sincerely provide everyone with some Dharma of liberation. It's not first making very good publicity while everything behind is empty. It's not like that. Our only purpose is that everyone benefits. Apart from this, we have no other purpose. Perhaps many people also basically understand the principles we've taught. So you see, for the sake of seeking the Dharma, as a great king, he also made his own body like a servant to seek the Dharma. The content of the verses the RSI just mentioned was named Asita. In the Northeast, there are many immortals. Those immortals are somewhat different from this RSI. Yellow immortal, constant immortal, and so forth, right? This RSI Asita addressed the great king. I have subtle, profound Dharma, rare in the world. If you can practice it, I can transmit it to you. At that time, that RSI Asita said this to the great king. Great king, hello. After the great king heard the RSI's words, in his mind he generated tremendously great joy. Moreover, he followed this RSI and could make offerings of all the requisites he needed, and also including things mentioned earlier, whether fruits, firewood, and also gourds, that is, fruits of herbaceous plants, like strawberries and such, gourds, and also constantly being reverent, with mind cherishing the wondrous Dharma, body and mind without weariness. What was it? What did the king cherish in his mind? It was the wondrous Dharma, so body and mind had no weariness. This point is very important. Many of us are probably also like this. Because if you have this wondrous Dharma in your mind, it seems however long the time, it doesn't matter. However tired you are, it doesn't matter. However bad the weather, it doesn't matter. Even if the body has some suffering, it doesn't matter. Actually, last year, when I had not long since had surgery because I'd made a vow to immediately teach the Lotus Sutra, later I went to receive the Lotus Sutra transmission from one of our old lamas. When receiving the transmission, my wound hadn't healed yet and hurt a bit. But when I thought about all the merit within it for the sake of the Lotus Sutra, even if the wound isn't healed or whatever, it's fine. That old lama said, it's okay. If you really can't, just lie down. but I said, lying down certainly won't do. I must sit properly. In this lifetime, receiving the Lotus Sutra transmission before dying, completing this is very difficult. So if you have the Dharma in your mind, many things aren't very difficult. Those of you here should also understand this. For the sake of universally liberating beings requesting the great Dharma, one also won't be attached to one's own body and such things. If our body and mind are both attached to the 5 desires, then we might be very miserable. The Sutra of the Collection of All Dharmas says, if a person regarding the 5 desires constantly generates craving, due to their mind's agitation, all evils follow in turn. Because of this reason, our minds become agitated. If the mind is agitated, then all evils appear. Pure Land Buddhism often speaks of single-minded and undisturbed. If the mind single-mindedly seeks the Dharma, then all these difficulties won't disturb your mind. If our minds focus on external forms, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches, then in this way we're distressed every day. I think people who have the Dharma in their minds also live very happily. It's okay. For the sake of seeking the Dharma, anything is acceptable. Many people, I feel that many of you now truly don't need ascetic practices. Like us in the past at Larungar, when recalling many ascetic experiences, I think for many of us, opening the computer, indeed this convenient method of the internet, this point is inconceivable. Otherwise, generally speaking, perhaps some lay people couldn't obtain the authentic Dharma in this lifetime because your life and household trivialities constantly entangle you, tightly bind you. If you want to come out to seek the great Dharma, where's the time? Among these people who come to Larungar each time, I'll stay one day, circumambulate the mandala 108 times, then immediately return. The children need to study. I need to go to work to earn money. I do not have the time to stay at Larungar. So no matter what kind of person, for most people, going to quiet places to peacefully seek the Dharma is very difficult. So for us now, with the internet, in the first moment, live broadcasting like this to everyone, I feel perhaps you don't understand what happiness means. Because if it's for a portion of the Dharma, for example, for 2 years, giving up all your work and then seeking the Dharma, perhaps this is a very great difficulty. But as long as we adjust the time a bit, basically in our own homes, using this method to receive teachings, we should generate joy. For the sake of seeking the Buddha Dharma, you see, this king diligently sought and obtained this Dharma. He made such a determined resolution. He didn't even want the royal position. Moreover, before ARSI obtaining this Dharma, he valued it so highly. So the king, to obtain such wondrous Dharma, after diligent practice, gradually attained Buddhahood. So this principle, the Buddha said, "Today I tell you all." Below it teaches, the Buddha told the bhikkhus that king at that time was actually me. That rishi at that time is the present Devadatta. But regarding Devadatta, you shouldn't think he's a bad person. Devadatta is a spiritual teacher. Why? Shakyamuni Buddha said, "My present perfection of the 6 paramitas, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, the 32 marks, the 80 minor marks, and also the purple golden hue, the Buddha's body's purple golden hue, and also the 10 powers and 4 fearlessnesses, and also the 4 means of attraction we just discussed in the Mahayana Sutra Lamkara, the 18 unique Buddha Dharmas, as well as all the merits of perfect enlightenment, these conditions for extensively liberating beings, all arose through reliance on Devadatta. Without Devadatta, I could not become Buddha. Originally, someone once sent me a message. I am very remarkable now. Without you from back then, there wouldn't be me today. So she herself was also very confident. She was also an attendant to a guru, a woman who said this. She herself said, "I'm very remarkable now. I'm the attendant to such and such guru. Very remarkable. Without you from back then, there wouldn't be me today. I'm very grateful to you." So Shakyamuni Buddha also said, "Without Devadatta from back then, there wouldn't be me today." Then let's teach tomorrow. As for the specifics regarding the time.
Sonandai tamsa thobaya tonani jana pase jirgana jirano chubai jupun sonen draja
bandangara badna asadarda bandangara badna asadarda Om asadar do